here's my word. Get the hell off my spread. Now.
For over 3 decades, a sprawling waterfront home in Newport Beach sat as a kind of shrine to a man who defined an entire era of American film. Behind its doors were the personal effects, secrets, and unresolved family tensions of John Wayne, one of Hollywood's most towering figures. When he died in 1979, his home was effectively frozen in time, and it would take more than 30 years before the public got a real look at what he left behind. What emerged wasn't just a collection of old movie props and dusty keepsakes. It was a window into the complicated life of a man who built an image of rugged American strength while wrestling with family strain, staggering medical battles, and a legacy that would later become fiercely contested. This is the story of John Wayne's fortune, his family, and the reckoning that followed his death. John Wayne began life as Marion Robert Morrison, born on May 26, 1907, in the small town of Winterset, Iowa. Even as an infant, he stood out. He was a notably large baby, enough that it made local news. As a toddler, he narrowly escaped death after falling into an icy creek, an incident that was only resolved because a passerby happened to pull him out in time. It was an early brush with mortality that, in hindsight, seemed to foreshadow the sheer physical toughness he would carry through his life and career. His name changed unexpectedly during childhood. When his parents had a second son, they chose to name him Robert, which meant young Marion's middle name had to be swapped to Mitchell to avoid confusion. It was a small, bureaucratic shuffle, but it was an early sign of just how much his identity would shift and evolve before he became the icon audiences would come to know. In 1914, financial hardship forced the family to relocate to Glendale, California, after his father's business venture collapsed. It was there that young Marion picked up the nickname that would eventually replace his birth name entirely, Duke. The moniker came from his beloved Airedale Terrier, who shared the same name. The pair were inseparable, often seen together around the neighborhood, and local firefighters began referring to them as Big Duke and Little Duke. The name stuck for the rest of his life. Athletics were a major part of his teenage years, and by 1925 his talent on the football field earned him a scholarship to the University of Southern California, where he studied pre-law and joined a fraternity. But a body surfing accident left him with a serious shoulder injury, costing him both his scholarship and his athletic future. At the time, it felt like the end of a dream. In reality, it redirected him toward an entirely different destiny. Without football, he took a job at a film studio in 1927, working behind the scenes as a prop man for a modest weekly wage. It wasn't glamorous, but it put him in proximity to the industry that would eventually make him a household name. His first appearance on screen came as an uncredited extra in football film, and it was during this period that he crossed paths with director John Ford, a relationship that would define much of his career. Ford saw potential in the young prop man and encouraged him to adopt a stronger stage name. After some deliberation, the name John Wayne was settled on, a name that would go on to become one of the most recognized in American film history. The years that followed were far from easy. Throughout the 1930s, Wayne appeared in dozens of low-budget Western films, many shot in a matter of days with minimal resources. Money was tight, and by the late 1930s, he had grown so discouraged by the lack of real success that he seriously considered walking away from acting altogether. Everything changed in 1939 with the release of a major studio Western. The production's leadership initially wanted a more established actor for the lead, but Ford fought hard to secure the role for Wayne, even threatening to abandon the project entirely if the studio didn't relent. Wayne's performance turned him into an overnight sensation, and the film went on to earn multiple Academy Award nominations. Despite the film's massive success, Wayne himself was paid only a fraction of what a star of his newfound stature might have expected. Still, the film cemented his image as the quintessential American Western hero, a persona he would protect carefully for the rest of his career, even turning down roles that didn't fit the tough, principled image audiences had come to expect from him. His partnership with John Ford would stretch across 5 decades and more than a dozen films, becoming one of the most influential director-actor collaborations in Hollywood history. Their relationship wasn't always easy. Ford had a reputation for pushing his actors hard, and Wayne often bore the brunt of it, being made to repeat simple scenes over and over on set. Despite the friction, Wayne came to believe that Ford's demanding style brought out his best work, and some of their collaborations, panned or overlooked at the time, are now regarded as among the greatest films ever made. Wayne's career had its share of massive risks. One of the biggest came in 1960 with a passion project he had wanted to make for over 15 years, ultimately mortgaging much of his personal property to help finance it. He insisted on building a full-scale set from the ground up, historically accurate down to the smallest detail, and the production employed thousands of extras and hundreds of horses across months of filming in brutal heat. Despite earning several Academy Award nominations, the film's enormous cost meant it never quite broke even, and Wayne was personally disappointed that his directing work on the project wasn't recognized. It took until 1969 for Wayne to finally win a competitive Academy Award for Best Actor, playing a grizzled, one-eyed marshal in a role he almost turned down due to his age and declining health following lung cancer surgery. The shoot was physically demanding, requiring him to use supplemental oxygen between takes in the high-altitude cold. His performance was a triumph, and the film became one of the biggest hits of his career. His acceptance speech at the Oscars, delivered while he was fighting off the flu, became one of the most quoted moments of his career, and the award is often remembered as much for honoring his decades of work as for the specific performance. Behind the legendary career was a personal life marked by upheaval. Wayne was married 3 times over the course of nearly 50 years. His first marriage began in 1933, and the couple had 4 children together, but the demands of his rising career kept him away from home for long stretches, and the relationship deteriorated. It ended in divorce in the mid-1940s. His second marriage, to a Mexican actress, was volatile and marked by intense jealousy and public discord, and it too ended in divorce after several turbulent years. His third marriage began in 1954 and lasted until his death in 1979, though the couple quietly separated years before he passed away. In his final years, Wayne found companionship with his secretary, who remained by his side through his cancer treatments and later wrote a memoir detailing their relationship and a softer, more private side of the actor that the public rarely saw. Wayne also carried on a long, well-known romantic relationship with a fellow actress during the late 1930s and into the 1940s, even while married to his first wife. The two reportedly wrote each other passionate letters, and she was said to have used her industry influence to help advance his career during that period. Though their romance eventually cooled, the two remained close for the rest of their lives. Wayne also shared a famously close, on-again, off-again working relationship and rumored romance with a longtime co-star, whose chemistry with him on screen was so convincing that fans often assumed the two were a real-life couple. She remained a loyal friend to Wayne until his final days, even helping arrange for him to receive a congressional honor as his health declined. Health problems shadowed much of Wayne's later life. In 1964, at the age of 57, he was diagnosed with lung cancer after decades of heavy smoking. Doctors removed part of his lung in a risky surgery with only a coin-flip chance of survival, but he pulled through and lived cancer-free for several years. Rather than keep his diagnosis private, Wayne chose to speak publicly about his illness, encouraging others to get screened despite warnings that the disclosure could hurt his public image. He became an outspoken advocate for cancer research, appearing in public service messages, and giving cancer an almost folksy, disarming nickname to make the disease feel less frightening to ordinary people. Cancer returned in 1979, this time in his stomach, and despite trying an experimental treatment, his health continued to decline. Even from his hospital bed, he continued recording messages advocating for greater investment in cancer research. His final film, released in 1976, told the story of an aging gunfighter facing a terminal diagnosis, a role that mirrored his real circumstances so closely it became widely viewed as his farewell to the screen. Even in poor health, he insisted on performing many of his own stunts and famously refused to let the studio alter a key detail of his character's fate to preserve the image of toughness he had built his entire career around. John Wayne died on June 11, 1979, at 72 years old, following a prolonged fight with stomach cancer. His death triggered an outpouring of national mourning. The sitting president publicly praised him as an American icon, and fans gathered outside his home and the hospital where he passed, leaving flowers, notes, and cowboy hats in tribute. A public memorial service allowed fans to say goodbye, and it was broadcast to millions of viewers. In an unusual honor, the U.S. Naval Academy inducted him as an honorary member of a graduating class, despite the fact that he had never served in the military himself. Shortly after his death, the airport serving Orange County was renamed in his honor, cementing his connection to the Southern California community where he had spent so much of his life. In the years following his death, His family established a foundation in his name dedicated to cancer research, which went on to fund the creation of an institute credited with developing new early cancer detection methods that have since saved countless lives, a fitting legacy for a man who had spent his final years urging the public to take the disease seriously. When Wayne's financial estate was finally tallied, it came in at just under $7 million, a substantial sum, but notably smaller than many expected for someone who had been among the highest-paid actors of his generation. Some of the discrepancy may be explained by his lavish spending and reported generosity, and some assets weren't part of the official estate at all. Shortly before his death, for instance, he sold his beloved converted World War II minesweeper yacht for $750,000, a transaction that added even more mystery to the full scope of what he actually left behind. Real estate had always been one of Wayne's passions, and his Newport Beach property, a waterfront home that looked unassuming from the street but was lavish inside, remained one of his most prized possessions until his death. The home eventually sold for millions of dollars after his passing. Before settling there, he had owned a large ranch property outside Los Angeles, along with additional land in Arizona and Washington state, reflecting both his appreciation for wide-open landscapes and a shrewd eye for property investment. The reading of Wayne's will reveal the controversy that shocked many who had followed his life closely. Despite having never formally divorced his third wife, Wayne left her nothing in his will, a decision that fueled years of speculation about the state of their relationship during their long separation. Instead, the bulk of his estate went to his 7 children from his first 2 marriages. This decision didn't resolve tensions within the family, it arguably deepened them. Years later, one of his daughters filed a lawsuit against her brother and the family's business enterprise over her share of the company, and disputes over sentimental items and memorabilia added further strain to an already fractured family dynamic. It wasn't until 2011 that the public finally got a real glimpse into what had been locked away since his death. Over 700 items connected to Wayne's life and career went up for auction in Los Angeles, drawing collectors and fans eager to own a tangible piece of his legacy. Many of these items had been sealed away in storage since the day he died, making the auction feel like the unsealing of a time capsule more than 3 decades in making. The collection included costumes, awards, personal scripts, and furniture pulled directly from his home. Some of the most fascinating pieces were his working scripts, which offered a glimpse into his process, some marked up and dog-eared from repeated use, others kept meticulously clean and organized. Everyday personal items also drew enormous interest, from his final driver's license to a collection of the colorful neckerchiefs he was known to wear off-camera. Several items shattered auction expectations entirely. A green beret worn in one of his military-themed films sold for well over $170,000, setting a record for costume headwear at auction. A cowboy hat worn across several of his Western films sold for close to $120,000, and the Golden Globe he received for his award-winning role went for over $140,000, a price reflecting its connection to arguably the most celebrated performance of his career. Even mundane personal items commanded jaw-dropping prices. His last driver's license alone sold for nearly $90,000, a startling testament to how deeply fans wanted a tangible connection to the man behind the legend. Beyond the film memorabilia, the auction revealed softer, more personal dimensions of Wayne's character. A gold-plated rifle he had gifted to a close friend sold for well over $100,000, highlighting a generous side rarely discussed in public retrospectives. His personal book collection, filled with titles on history and military strategy, offered insight into his intellectual interests, while an unexpected collection of seashells hinted at hobbies far removed from his tough-guy screen persona. A portrait of Wayne created by a noted artist, which he had proudly displayed in his home, fetched over $70,000, a reminder of how much his public image mattered to him personally as well as professionally. Family photographs, personal letters, and furniture from his home rounded out the auction, giving fans an unusually intimate look at a man who, for decades, had represented rugged American masculinity on the silver screen. Taken together, the auction items painted a fuller picture of Wayne as not just a movie star, but a father, friend, and complex individual whose private life didn't always match the polished image audiences saw in theaters. That complexity became even more apparent in later years as a controversial 1971 magazine interview resurfaced in the public conversation. In it, Wayne made comments about race and indigenous land rights that were deeply offensive by any standard, and the resurfacing of those remarks decades later, amplified by social media, sparked renewed and heated debate over how to reconcile his cultural legacy with his personal beliefs. The controversy reached beyond social media commentary, eventually prompting real-world reconsiderations of institutions and honors bearing his name, including public discussions about airport naming rights and the removal of a university exhibit dedicated to his career. These debates remain unresolved even now, reflecting a broader and ongoing cultural reckoning with how society remembers complicated historical figures. For some, Wayne's body of work in film remains too significant to dismiss, representing an era of American cinema that shaped generations of moviegoers. For others, his personal remarks are impossible to separate from the legacy of a public figure whose image was built, in part, on a mythologized version of American history. What's clear is that the story of John Wayne, his rise from a struggling prop man to one of the most recognizable stars in film history, his private struggles and triumphs, and the controversies that followed him even after death, remains one of the more layered and contested legacies in Hollywood history, still being examined and re-examined decades after the doors to his Newport Beach home were finally reopened.